Good evening, CrossFit Acadiana, and this is Coach Tyler. I wanted to talk to you about a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and that is mental health. Ironically, Coach Joseph and I, who are your two co-owners along with Coach Eli, Joseph and I met at Oceans Behavioral Hospital. This is where we worked together for over 10 years. Leading the marketing teams, and what we found was that, man, we just so desperately wanted to work together in an area that was proactive. And so when we both found CrossFit, it just made sense to be able to give back to a community that also was like-minded and wanted the same thing. And so in honor of Mental Health Month, I wanted to kind of attack this subject. And so in alignment with CrossFit, CrossFit teaches a spectrum of health, right? So, and the spectrum looks something like this. We have a state of illness, a state of wellness, and a state of fitness. And the premise is that if I'm in a state of fitness, then that is a hedge of protection from illness, right? So worst case scenario, I end up in a state of wellness before I would end up back in a state of illness. And granted, there are a number of ways that can be overcome, but the general consensus with avoiding metabolic derangement disorders such as diabetes, hypertension, and those type of disorders that come from not moving and not eating healthy to an extent, right? And so when it comes to mental health, we don't oftentimes think of it as a practice. And I know what you're thinking. A lot of times we don't know what to do. And so what I wanted to do was kind of come up with a spectrum as well. And so Joseph and I have also been working with a company called The Kitchen Table. And they're a local group of mental health professionals, which is different from a mental illness type of treatment, right? And so if I'm in a state of mental illness, meaning I'm having some depression, some anxiety, or some insomnia that currently needs to be treated, and it's not in a state of stabilization or wellness, it's very difficult to get into a state of mental health. But once we're in a state of stability, and it's important for us to start to work on growth patterns in an effort to achieve that state of mental health that we're always trying to improve. And a lot of that has to do with our ego. And so I don't mean ego in the sense of being narcissistic or feeling like my pride is getting in the way, right? Like that's definitely a thing. So one of the cool books that I read over this quarantine was a book called The Dichotomy of Leadership by Jocko Willink, and he talks a little bit about ego and ego death. And so when we learn to practice a sense of gratitude, it allows us to increase our effectiveness because we all of a sudden change our mindset. And so the general rule of thumb is that if your ego, quote unquote, your anger flares up, then your ego has gotten in the way, and that's a me thing, not necessarily a them thing, right? So number one tip is, can we check our ego, right? Keep this in mind. The ego, in some cases, there's a book called You're a Badass by Jen Sincero, and she talks about the ego as the big snooze. Meaning that our brain has turned off. It's gone to sleep because it doesn't want to grow. Our ego is our subconscious. A lot of times as children and in our developmental stages early on in life, we tend to absorb some things and we didn't even realize we were absorbing them. And so some things and some behaviors kind of get in there and we never really go back and visit them. And so the best way to do that sometimes is to identify the behavior that we can see, that everyone can see, and then reverse engineer where that started, right? Interestingly enough, when it comes to the ego is there to protect us. The ego says we don't need to change. Why change something if it has kept me alive for 35 years, which is how old I am, right? And that's a little counterintuitive. So when it's time to change, our body wants to reject that and it wants to fight with us. And you'll see this in your fitness journey along with your mental health journey. So oftentimes we don't like to accept new information. And in fact, our body and even our ego wants to reject new information because we don't need new information. So you always hear about elderly folks that you can't teach an old dog new tricks. And after having worked with dementia patients for the last 14, 15 years, I can assure you that those dogs that do not learn new tricks lose their purpose in life at times. And you start to see depression set in, you start to see anxiety set in, and all of a sudden, our cognition does start to slow down. And so, guys, learning and accepting new information and growing as a person will always allow you to grow as a professional, as a parent, as a grandparent, whatever the case might be. So, just wanted to kind of talk through that as well. So, next, we want to talk about a few tips that can allow us to not only fend off things like depression and anxiety, we want to grow past that to where we can have a hedge of protection against mental illness by working on our mental health. And so one of those things is our practice of mindfulness, which is a state of consciousness, which allows us to be present in the moment. And if there's any indication in our society these days, it's that we don't like to be present with our own thoughts. Hence, when you walk into the store, it's pretty easy to see that people will pick up their phones just to avoid conversation or whatever the case might be, to kind of zone out and tune out from any anxieties that may be coming up. And the problem with that is we lose our practice of being able to be present in the moment. And so I've kind of had the opportunity to take my spirituality and my prayer life to another level by practicing my breathing, which also, mind you, helps with your fitness. So 4 seconds inhale, 4 seconds exhale allows me to physically decrease my heart rate, especially when I'm doing something like Murph or something like Fran, and I desperately need to catch my breath in my workouts, right? And so when the same can be said, the body responds physically in a similar manner to stress, whether it's because I'm working out or because I'm at the job or I'm in an argument with my spouse or whatever the case might be. It's so important that we do what I call a pop out, right? And so I'm going to observe my surroundings without being reactive. And we live in a society oftentimes, and you see it on social media all the time, that we want to react. We want to get triggered. You know, that's such a buzzword these days. Whatever happened to the ability to just let things slide, right? So a stimulus comes about, it wants a reaction, and yet I rise above it with mindfulness, being conscious that this is about to affect my mood, what's coming inside of me, right? That stimulus is trying to get inside and evoke something inside of me. I'm in control of that. I don't have to succumb to that, right? And so that's step 2. So number 1, ego. Number 2, mindfulness. Being conscious and being present in the moment allows you to find your breath and return back to a state of health to an extent, right? And so ultimately, this leads to better listening skills, leads to more meaningful relationships, just by practicing a couple of those things in a safe place, right? And so I'm coming to you tonight from my back patio, which I consider to be my safe place. This is where I come to inhale, exhale, and practice. So that way, when I'm out in the real world and something comes around that wants to get inside and really rile me up, I can practice kind of fending that off. And so Guys, I hope you guys enjoyed. My degree's in psychology and behavioral sciences, and so this is something that I'm so passionate about, and it's near and dear to me. We wanted to do something in honor of Mental Health Month, and we hope that you enjoy these tips. Leave comments down below if you'd like to see more. Thanks. Have a great day.